probably don't need to tell any of you in this room that Seattle has a very long and rich music history. And I probably also don't need to tell any of you that people in music and the arts in general frequently struggle with a lot of things, a lot of challenges, including financial instability and addiction and mental illness, among other factors. But I think anyone who loves music also knows pretty much the bottomless capacity that music has for bringing people together and building community and for healing and growth. And so it's that kind of complex intersection of things that we're going to be talking about here today. Paurl Walsh is sort of the piece that brought all this together today. He's a local composer, performer, producer, recording engineer, and sound artist, and he's been very vocal with his own struggles about dealing with some of the challenges of being a musician here today. So this program was created by Paurl as part of the 2018 Fremont Bridge Composer in Residency program in collaboration with Path with Art, Seattle Public Library, Seattle Department of Transportation, and the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. Please join me in welcoming Paurl Walsh.
Thank you, Summer, for the introduction. As Summer said, I am the 2018 Fremont Bridge Composer in Residence, and that's the basic reason why we're all here today. But I think more importantly, we're here because there are issues in the music industry that I think a lot of people would agree we're not really addressing very well, and I think they're important and we should address them. So I'm just going to start by talking a little bit about the Fremont Bridge residency and the work that I've created in that capacity over the last year, and then we'll get started with our panel discussion. So about a year ago, almost to the day, I was awarded the Fremont Bridge Composer Residency. That's a really interesting and kind of rare opportunity for a musician to create a new musical work in residence in the northwest tower of the Fremont Bridge. So I spent all last summer writing music and having meetings and doing research in the northwest tower of the Fremont Bridge, which was really cool. It's about a 12-foot square room, windows, 360 degrees. You can see, you can see Lake Union from one direction, and the other direction you can see the bridge canal towards Ballard and the Ballard Bridge. Obviously, really beautiful, unique environment in which to work. So that was a really cool experience. I've spent most of my time writing music that will both end up on a studio record that will be released later this month, and a new concert music work that will be premiering at Town Hall on May 23rd in a couple weeks. And that'll be the final culmination of this project. One of the things about I guess the best way to start is to talk about sort of the project that I proposed to the city and what got me the job, basically. And I think that is at the core of why we're here today. And that is that I have a very deeply personal experience with the Fremont Bridge and the downtown Fremont neighborhood, and it also ties in directly to the themes we're talking about today: poverty, mental illness, substance abuse, suicidality, those types of things. I have a recording studio / creative space in downtown Fremont that I've had and maintained for about 10 years now. And when I first got that space about 10 years ago, I was having a very hard time in my life. I was an alcoholic, I was doing a lot of drugs, and I was sort of on the verge of being homeless for several years. I was never really on the streets, but I was, housing challenged, I guess you could say, for quite a while. And most of my time during that time period in my life was spent in downtown Fremont, walking across the Fremont Bridge, being around the bridge. And to me, because of that experience, the bridge represents a very specific thing in my life, a specific part of my past. It's very painful. It's very hard to talk about, but I really believe that it's important to talk about these things publicly, to try to do what we can to destigmatize these issues. One of the fundamental problems with this stuff, I think, is that we don't talk openly and honestly, like as a culture, as a community, about these things. And so it's my hope today that sharing a little bit of my story might encourage you to do the same with loved ones in your life if you're dealing with similar issues, or to just generally have a more nuanced understanding of these issues if you don't directly suffer from them yourself, because you know somebody who does, every one of you. And I think it's really important to remember that, because we forget that. So, the musical work that I wrote is about that time period in my life. I'm talking in this music about the specifics of my situation in a very impressionistic and general sense. If you hear this music, you won't get a beginning, a middle, and an end. It won't be totally clearly laid out in that way, because my hope is that my personal experience, talking about it musically and artistically this way, and in a way that's a little more impressionistic and not specific, can lead to that work hopefully being a vessel for the audience, for other people to place their own related experiences within. And I don't know if that makes sense. That might be kind of an obtuse concept, but I guess basically it just means that I think that we all, on some level, can identify with people who are suffering from mental illness, or suffering from addiction issues, or suffering from suicidality or poverty, which is a driving force behind a lot of these things for a lot of people. It was for me. And today what we're going to try to talk about is how those things intersect with trying to be a musician and trying to be a creative. I mean, we'll talk specifically in the terms of music, but I think a lot of these themes not only apply to other artistic mediums, but to the whole world. But the music industry is uniquely beset upon by these issues, I think, and that's what we're focusing on today. So the album is going to be released on May 23rd, and the concert is at Town Hall on May 23rd, and it's free, open to the public. The album will be available streaming for free that day as well. So I encourage you to take a listen, and hopefully it resonates with you. I think I'd like to play a song for you from the record, just as maybe an illustration of what I'm trying to talk about. And I'm just going to really quickly tell you the story behind this song, because I think it maybe illustrates these issues in a more deeply universal way. This is a piece of music that I wrote about an incident that happened to me when I was a teenager. I grew up in the mountains, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and I was driving alone late at night. I was probably 19 years old, maybe 18, and I hit a deer, snapped its neck. And I got out of the car, I dragged the deer off the road, and sat with it while it died. I watched the life leave its eyes, and that moment encompassed a lot of things for me, about how there's the environmental sort of angle of how, like, we are destroying everything around us physically, but there's also a more wider angle view of that for me, and that is that, like, it really demonstrated how destructive the human race can be, not only with the environment, but with ourselves and with each other.
I got to hang out with Paurl as part of the Bridge residency. I did some community outreach work with him, which this ultimately became a manifestation of. Although I wasn't a huge part of organizing this event, I'm excited to be part of it and be part of this conversation. A lot of the questions that I'm going to be asking folks are questions that I have a real genuine interest in. So I'm really, really asking these things, which is great. I want to lay a couple of ground rules just for everybody before I invite the panelists up, and then I'll have them come up and they'll introduce themselves, and that'll be great. The first thing that I want to say, and this is just something that's part of my practice, is that I want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish people, that's where this conversation is happening, and that's always important to remember and to honor that we're visitors here. And I also want to say that we're talking about some intense and traumatic stuff, and everybody's at a different place with this subject matter, and I just want to encourage folks to take care of themselves, and even though it feels sort of dark and contained, that this is a porous space, and I want to encourage folks to take care of themselves. So if something's coming up for you where you're like, wow, it's hard for me to listen to this kind of story right now, please get up, take a break, walk around, come back, do what you need to do. And that's true for our panelists as well. As you're speaking, if you're sort of like, God, right, that was a really hard time, you are always welcome to say, I think that's maybe a little bit too much. I think that's all I want to say about that. Totally welcome to do that. I also want to remind them that we're going for dialogue over monologue, so be aware of your length of responses. I don't like cutting people off, but I will because I'm the facilitator. I also want to encourage everybody to, and when we open questions up from the audience, just remind folks to speak from your own experience, and that this isn't an invitation to sort of name names about people we have rough histories with or speak for other people's experiences. Just do the best to speak from your own experience. That being said, it's important to be honest. Like Paurl said, a lot of what we're doing here today is to be in conversation with things that don't get talked about enough. So it is okay to speak from your experience with honesty, and try not to censor yourself too much where that's concerned, as long as you're keeping in mind the previous ground rules. And the other thing that I want to say, I think it's important to say things like this at these sorts of events, is that we are going to be reflective about positives as well. But I want to remind folks that this is just a conversation, and we're all going to be getting to know each other, and we're not going to solve all of these issues today. It would be great if we could, but that's not realistic. That's not how change moves. So I just want to remind folks of that, put that out in the room, that we're going to talk about this, and this is a great first step, but that the emphasis doesn't need to be on like, today it all changes, yeah? Because that's not really how these things work, but this is a good step, yeah? Okay, I'm gonna invite the panelists. Maybe we'll start with you, Jovino, but the question is for everyone. I would love for you to introduce yourself, and that can include just your name and maybe how long you've been in Seattle, and why you think you're here today would be great to hear, and also if you would share just an early memory about why music is important to you.
I'm from Brazil, so I've been living in Seattle for 26 years this year, it's going to be. And so as an immigrant, a person from South America, and I was attracted to the city a couple of years before that while I was on tour, passing through. And I came as a student at Cornish College of the Arts. And after a couple of semesters, as a student, I became a professor there. It's one of those crazy things that happen. I don't know how, but I'm there still today, which is beautiful because I'm a professional musician. I tour, I give lectures, but I also always connected with the communities wherever I go. And in Seattle, for me, it's really important to be connected. Through Cornish, we get a lot of young musicians, but I also work with children. I work with community groups, Jazz Night School, Music Works Northwest, and just basically like this. You come into the community and you talk to people. Music for me is really important because it's always been a very powerful force. It's an invisible thing that we cannot touch, we cannot grasp with our hands, and we cannot make even though we make a product out of it, it's no longer the product. Now it's like a performance. There's no more records, or there might be the remnants of the fossil record of fossil record is a good name for that. But still, it's such a powerful thing. You cannot even imagine a day of your life without music. So I believe the musicians are the modern day shamans that stand in the edge of different worlds, the visible world, the invisible world, the tangible world, the intangible world. So it's also one of the only few human endeavors that carries across generations. If you be an amazing sports person, you cannot, at the age of 65, play basketball with a 15-year-old kid because you're gonna hurt. But musically, yes, you can play with a 15-year-old. I play with my grandson, who's 6, and we have a very deep musical conversations, not because he's a genius or I'm a genius, but because music is part of that pre-language. You know, the music starts at a point that's before even the words we can utter. So I think it's really important, first of all, to be here and also to be able to share in the conversation everybody else's experience regarding that. And if you have more questions, we'll talk later. Thank you.
I've been in the music industry here in Seattle for about 12 years, doing a variety of things. I started with KEXP. I've done work on festivals. I do the production work for the visual arts for Bumbershoot. I have managed artists to greater and lesser degrees throughout my career. And I just really enjoy the community that music brings together.
I came to Seattle in 1995 to be a professional storyteller and musician. I had been performing for a decade. Appalachian stories of my grandfather, Native American stories, East Indian stories, multicultural, and I'd had a dream of bringing interfaith and multicultural people together through my own history. And so I came to Seattle in 95 with the mission to work as music is healing and stories as healing and myth and metaphor. And then I crashed. And at some point I may discuss how I crashed and why I crashed. But that's when I really began the road of recovery. And I've only recently begun to work with Path with Art. I'm also a journalist in my work. Now I started to really establish a magazine through Harborview called Peering Forward for Mental Health. And we've been blessed to be coming out for 3 years now and hit 1,000 people at 8 different agencies downtown. The reason music is so important to me is because I was able to tell stories just at the keyboard without reading or writing at the age of 3. And I was told that when I was 3, I chose the flute, or it chose me through Mozart's The Magic Flute. And music has been a deep companion through many deep waters, and there's been points where I haven't been able to play music, but it has never died. It's like an eternal flame inside of me. Despite all the things that have gone on around this light, it's always present. Thank you for coming.
Hi, my name's Ray. My first, when I grew up in Alaska, and it was a pretty chaotic, abusive household that I grew up in, and music always was kind of a place of retreat for me. And I don't know that I would today consider myself to be in the music industry, but I do like supporting events like this. And anyway, as a kid, music was kind of a place to retreat and be safe. And my life has been pretty amazing, to be honest with you. It's had its ups and downs. I've lived I've had the opportunity to live as an upper middle class person, and I've also had the opportunity to live as a homeless person. And as terrifying as both of those were, they were necessary steps to get me to where I am today, and which is a pretty damn awesome place. And I did struggle with addiction for many years, and that's what actually took me out of the upper middle class and took me to homelessness. But it's been more than 5.5 years now since my last use, and music has been a big part of pulling me out of that. And like I shared, music was kind of a place to retreat all of my life. And since being in recovery from my addiction, I've kind of turned that around and made music as a way to give back and to connect with people. And it's been extremely instrumental in personal growth and connecting with people, and I feel like that connection is super. I don't know if there's anything more important than connecting with others to help recover from addiction. And with that, I'll pass.
So the first question is sort of, I'm interested in sort of, if we look at these issues that we're talking about, substance abuse, mental health issues, issues with like poverty, and the creative arts life, right? And we look at like the Venn diagram where music intersects with those issues. I'm curious to hear you talk about what you think are some of the unique aspects of music as a career, as an industry, that makes it distinct from other art forms and how they intersect or contribute to these issues. And just in case anyone's like, well, I don't know what those specifics might be, I'm wondering about like the economics of music, you know, what's true about the music community, different cultures, how we try and get recognized in music, the ways that those are unique and how they come up against these issues. And this is open to anybody to respond on the panel.
Oh, maybe I'll go first here. You mentioned the Venn diagram. If you guys don't know what it is, it's like circles that intersect, 2 or 3 circles, and there are things that are common. I like to think of it in one more dimension. Instead of just circles, I like to think of it as cones that pull up and pull down. So there's so many things in life, like poverty, for instance, or addiction, or a toxic relationship. Those are things that, in a way, are very hard to come out of, just because it takes more than just willpower, because it's like a gravity. We call those gravity wells. It's like the water going down the drain. It always tends to pull you down, and it requires an intense amount of energy to escape. And music, in a way, provides the opposite cone, because everything spiraling down, music spirals too, but in the other direction. And it happens to be one of those things that it's like the ultimate transformer. Because if you have, let's say you have an amazing experience in your life, you're very happy, you just found a new love, you just moved to a beautiful place, and you just won the lottery, you want to write a song about that. And it's great. It's a positive thing you put in, and a positive thing comes out. The opposite is not true. Because if you have a very sad experience, the blues is a living proof of that, how powerful the blues are in putting out an experience. And the people that have been the most, I mean, I teach improvisation, and people that say, oh, I like to be comfortable with improvisation. I said, if you get comfortable, first thing you're going to do is look at your phone, pick up the TV remote. That's not being comfortable. I mean, you're not going to improvise like this. The biggest improvisers in the world are the people who are crossing borders right now, are the people who are getting in a boat in Syria trying to get to a better place with their kids, the people who were in slavery, people who were refugees and exiles of all sorts. People have had to leave their country behind. That's improvisation. So in the area of music, we put that energy that makes you overcome something that everything is pulling you in the other direction. And as I said before, music is intangible, has no mass, has no weight, but it has the potential to transform things that weigh you down and pull you in the other direction. So sad music is just as beautiful as happy music. That's what I'm trying to say.
Music is one of the few industries where what keeps it running is the sales of alcohol. And that's one of the unfortunate things about this. Alcohol is one of the more common things that involved in most musicians' aspects of their careers. Venues don't really make money off of ticket sales. Most of that goes to the artists. They make their money off of drink sales. So that is really tied in with an artist's experience in their world. You know, when you finish the show, people want to buy you a drink, and it's just constantly at you from all angles. You get sponsorships from alcohol, distributors and things like that. They're putting in money to help your career further so they could get more drink sales. So the fact that this beautiful thing that all of you are doing with, creating and sharing your personal experiences has this undercurrent is one of the biggest challenges I think that we face as a community of people who, like me, I get to enjoy the experience of what you guys are doing. But, with people not buying albums as much anymore and everything that goes on with trying to make actual money and living with arts, with your art specifically is a challenge.
So I'm not actually in the music industry, but I was in an artistic industry when I lived in Ohio, which is where I came from, in Cleveland. And I created a space where I was able to put my original music and my grandfather's music, which was Appalachian in descent. Some people know as Ridge Runner or Hillbilly, but the real thing is Appalachia. So I was able to kind of have this serendipity where I suddenly realized I could take his poetry, I could take his stories, and I could take his music and put it into the nursing homes, and I could give out the history, and then it grew from there. Suddenly I was playing my Native American flute, and I was telling Native American stories, and always clarifying that I'm not Native American when I was doing this. So when I went out, I would do these multicultural programs and create my own music, stating explicitly that they were my original pieces that were assisting in delivery of the art of the story. East Indian, I don't have East Indian instruments, but I was able to, and at the time I was making money as a storyteller, so I was able to embrace my music and put it in that format. And when I came here, storytellers were a big thing in '95. It was the #1 place for professional storytellers. So this is where I thought that I would put my music and my creativity. Things have shifted since that time, but I was not faced, as many musicians are, with the alcohol situation. I was faced with how many things can I produce, how many programs can I produce, how many cultures can I cram into my head, and how many music pieces can I understand. But I really focused on my own history, so I was very blessed in that way. I no longer do the storytelling and programs, however.
Yeah, Leigh, I think you bring up a really interesting point in the alcohol sales industry and how that really drives a lot of things. I think maybe it's not true across all aspects of the music industry and music consumption and the life of being a musician, but it is a very important and potentially really destructive factor in a lot of areas. Like I did a lot of touring in rock bands back in the day. I did a lot of that, and that's a specific world in which it's just constant drinking and alcohol, and like you're in bars. Your job is to like basically live in bars. And every night you're in a different bar in a different town in some random city somewhere, and there's not really much else to do but drink. And so you end up getting loaded every night, and that's a big part of how I became an alcoholic. Like it's just like that spirals out of control really quickly and takes over. So in my experience, it was a huge factor. What you're talking about is a huge factor. But I don't know if that's the same thing, in the classical world or the jazz world, or in other more traditional forms of music, or what. I think it varies, but a lot of what drives the music industry is the pop and rock and hip hop worlds, and I think that it's a big problem in those worlds. And like I think the way the venues position themselves and interact with the sales of alcohol and is a very important factor. And yeah, so that's a good insight. Like I totally, from my experience, I can definitely identify with that. But I guess it also maybe illustrates a little bit like how music is such a large field, and how like that's probably not an issue for a lot of people who make music their profession or make it their passion, like, but there's still plenty of other ways to become an alcoholic, right? So I don't know, that is an interesting thing to think about, I guess. I don't really know what I'm saying other than that that's a good, interesting path of inquiry, I think, these issues.
Thank you. The other thing was like when you are in that, we are in clubs and bars and playing music and things like that, it makes it easier to those who are self-medicating because you have access to it. It's constant.
Thanks, everybody. The next thing I want to focus on, and some of this is just to sort of help frame the conversation. So these are things that are unique to the music industry, and I'm wondering if you all would mind talking a little bit about things that you see that are unique to Seattle. So it can both be like the positives, like Seattle has like, I mean, as Summer mentioned, right? Like we have a very sort of famous and renowned music scene, but a huge part of that fame is for artists who have passed, right? Who have killed themselves, and that's part of the mystique, and that's complicated. So I wonder if you could talk about, you know, and like, yeah, what are some things that are particular to the culture and scene here, and how they relate to issues around poverty, mental health, and substance use? And if you've noticed, and a lot of us have been here for a while, if you've noticed a change over time, because Seattle is also a very dynamic place, and it's not Seattle grunge of the 90s. Like there's been a lot of shifts. So what's unique about Seattle, and how do you see that being constant, and how have you noticed that change?
Something here. One thing that if you look at the history of Seattle, way before I came here, Seattle was traditionally a place where the people came here before going to the gold rush up in Alaska and the Yukon. And this is the place where when you found gold, this is the place where you came to spend it. So it was traditionally known as a den of vice. And that attitude, not only that scene, but also the attitude towards, so music and entertainment were basically associated with prostitution and gambling, and places where you could separate the person from their money very quickly, because people came with their money here, their gold that they found. So that, I mean, as long as recently as maybe 20 years ago, there's still city ordinances that pretty much made it impossible for anybody, any kid, any teenager to go to see live music, because he was considered that of the whole alcohol thing you've mentioned. So there was something called the teen ordinance, or teen dance ordinance. And I was involved with the Recording Academy when we had to prove that actually there was an importance, and we had to show economically what was the actual economic impact of music in the city. And we realized that actually music was economically more important than, say, bioengineering in Seattle. And that was like, what? Really? Because, as we said, that we usually associate with clubs and bars and basically alcohol and drug consumption and the den of perdition, like what people fall into the big drain and just come down. But music is much more than this. Music is also discipline. So if I'm talking to people as musicians, we can see, if you want to be a musician, you will know the first thing is that nobody is ever at the end of that line. There's not such a thing as the ultimate musician that knows everything. My role models are in their mid-80s, and they're learning every day. So if you want to make a discipline in music, also realize that, say, if you start using something too much or going beyond the point when that thing is no longer healthy, you will not become a better musician. You actually become a worse musician, because your reflex get dumbed down, you get blunted by the, you don't have anymore the agility. And that's a really important thing. If you want to become a better musician, then I was a person completely without discipline. I could just do a whole bunch of different things and think I could do them all very well. But when music became a path for me, it was like training a dog, and I was the dog. To be trained to be patient, to sit with that piece of music, and sometimes it would take years for you to master something that I feel so proud. And when you feel very proud, you get, yes, I'm at the top of the world. I know everything. I can just relax. No. Because then you realize that what you thought was the end of the road is actually just another door to another road, and often a harder one. So if you can focus on that, that becomes the carrot on a stick that kind of keeps drawing you forward. And then you do everything that you need to make that path be clear for you. And again, the financial return on that. If you become a better musician, you're not necessarily going to make more money. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sad to say that. But what it gives in terms of what I said earlier about the musician being the shaman is because you are living in the intersection of the visible world and in the invisible world. Music is invisible, so that's where we reach. We're like fishermen and fisherwomen of invisible things that we make them audible. Not visible, but we make them audible. And in that sense, we inspire people. And that's why music is also community. You could just play in your bedroom forever, and you'll be very happy. But the moment you start to play with others, and those others start to play for other people, that's when the community is created and the circle expands.
Due to a lot of the weather, brings people in during those months where we all want to hibernate, and that's a period of creation. But there is this thing that, you know, people are really drawn to this area, and it is a really powerful community when people come together to play music with each other, for each other. And we're very lucky. There's lots of places in this country who do not have this type of environment that we are lucky to enjoy. There's also this kind of, you know, Wild West aspect of where we are, because it is more expensive to tour in and out of Seattle than most other places in the country. So we have had to work really hard to create a wonderful music community for ourselves, and not as much, I mean, now it's a little easier with touring, but it still is one of those things that we have a very thriving community because of our isolationist natures, which I think have worked in our favor for creating some really powerful and amazing music that's come out of this area.
For me, music was both a path into that sort of downward spiral, sort of, Jovino, that you were describing, and also the path out of it. So I think that's something that maybe we haven't really talked about, that there's all these beautiful outcomes with music, and music, you know, our lives are made so much better by it, and it's just amazing force. But I think it is also capable of, I don't know about directly, but at least indirectly, being potentially destructive and potentially being a negative force in some people's lives. And I think that happened with me. It's not music itself, it's what humans do with it, and I think really it boils down to capitalism, really, you know, and how capitalism has tried to take this beautiful, pure thing, just like it does with everything, and turn a profit out of it. And the mechanisms by which that process happens are incredibly destructive to all things, and music is not immune. Is not immune to it. So I think it's important to temper our sort of reverence for music with the reality that it's also potentially, it can potentially be a destructive force as well. It's less common, I think, and I think that's it's definitely something we don't talk a lot about. But I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that or comment on that. I'd be curious to hear what you guys thought about that idea, that like it can be, it's a good force in the world, but it can also be potentially destructive or potentially lead to problems for people in their lives. Maybe I'm alone, and maybe that I'm the only person that's ever happened to, but I do feel like there's a direct connection in my own personal experience there, where my own path in music really did help lead me down a path of addiction and depression, and subsequently was also the reason that I was able to pull myself out of it. But
Right.
I don't know if it would have existed, if that problem would have existed if I didn't pursue music as a career.
My experience with music is there was when I was working as a storyteller, which also encompassed my original music, I realized how fortunate I was to have a package to sell, that it became me selling me. I was everything. I was running the whole thing myself, and health issues, you know, came into full force with me and broke that down into nothingness. So, you know, my obsession with the art form and the expression of the art form and me, because I was a solo artist, broke me down. And it's only been, I would say, within the past 6 months to a year, through all my recovery issues going through, that I was a person in recovery doing music. And that's what broke me open, is my music was an isolative force. It was also an ego force. Mm. So in that way, you know, the shield is put up. It's me. Hey, this is me. And in my recovery, the most expansive idea that has come has not been through the music, but through the idea that whatever I've come through, my hand is out to you, because I'm not alone anymore. In the music, I can hide behind the notes, I can hide behind the composition, I can hide behind the look good. And it wasn't until I lost my flute in a psychotic episode on the streets that I got it, that I had an issue that was much more important to handle than whether I was going to make it in music. My flute had been like my best friend. It was my voice. But I had to break down so that I could be brought up to have a place where I can speak to you today, that I can speak my truth, but I can also listen. Thank you.
Sort of like what you were just talking about, Paurl, there is this sort of double-edged sword of how music gets defined. And I'm directing this question at you, Leigh, because I feel like you're so inside of the industry. You get to see so many people come through your club, who are trying to define a kind of success. And I know that gets defined differently for different folks. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you see folks that are coming through the club, how well-being and life stability gets impacted by pursuing music and trying to be successful in music through that venue specifically.
From my experience, the people who are coming through the venues the size of the Tractor, they're touring 150 plus days a year. So that means that they're away from their families, their friends, their stability circles, their homes, all of that. And it's really easy to get off of a good, like a path where you have strong support and all of that, because you're just running from city to city in these long drives, stuck in a van full of other people just like you in that situation. But the ones that I see who are more successful, who work really hard, are not the ones who are partying and treating it like this is like a good time fun thing. It's their job, and they're treating it as such, and they're treating it as this is their business, and they're doing all aspects of it, all the marketing, all of the communications with fans via their social media. They're doing their merch sales. They're coming up with all of that in addition to the creative outlet, which is fueling that industry that they're in. But I feel like it can be really trying. Like one of the things that about technology that I think has been really positive is I see people, as soon as they load into the venue and they have a few minutes of downtime, they're on FaceTime with their families. They're talking to their kids and checking in with their people and things like that. So that's helped in a lot of ways bring a little bit more stability on the road, or sometimes families will, tour together, things like that. So they're finding different ways to make it so that they're working towards being very healthy, treating themselves well on the road.
Yeah, this is really important, I think, to have this thing. We have a culture that tends to treat musicians, we call them stars or superstars, and we think of this inaccessible people who live in a bubble, and many times they have to live in a bubble because they created a whole system around them that they cannot go outside and walk into a cafe and order a latte or something because, oh my God, is that person is over there? The celebrity, I guess is the word that I'm trying to. So in trying to make musicians celebrity, this is something that music has gone through ups and downs. If you look at the history of music, back when it was like sacred music, you were like Johann Sebastian Bach. He was a church musician. He was basically hired to write songs for somebody's baptism or somebody's wedding or somebody's birthday. And it was never about him. It was about the music. And then music went through times and was the virtuoso, that person who could sing the highest note, who could play the fastest violin, and could be the most, sort of like the Olympic Games of music, where if you played faster or louder or reach more notes with your hand on the piano, you would be a better musician because of that sort of quantitative aspect. And now we're living, that's like how many million records have you sold? Okay, so maybe I sold 1 million records, so that's really good. Well, but you sold 5 million, so I suck. Because I don't sell 5 million, I sell 1 million. And when it becomes that kind of metric, and you see this every day, you just have to open any kind of publication. Wow, the emerging artist, perhaps that person is being sweating there for 10 years, 15 years, and said, wow, just came into the scene, because we sort of equate popularity with quality. which nothing against popularity. We all sometimes wish it could be very popular and have 100,000 people in our concerts, but that has a huge price. So I think that as a musician, you owe it first of all to the art that you chose, because that is a sacred thing. For me, it's like music is my job, it's my hobby, it's my pastime, it's my religion. So I tell people, say, well, I'm going to be 65 years old this year. People say, well, what are you going to do when you retire? I say, I'm sorry, I retired at the age of 23. Because that's what you do when you retire. You do what you finally always wanted to do. I'm a biologist by training, but then I became a musician at the age of 23. I retired right there. I do what I like, I wake up motivated. And I think, I'm not saying that it has to be the same for everybody, but I'm saying you can be like this. Music can be something that really keeps you on the path of becoming a better musician. You become a better person in the process.
Actually, Jovino, I'm going to go back to you again, just because in addition to the other things that you do in your life, you work at Cornish, as you mentioned, and so you see a lot of young people kind of come through and coming up, young people that are aspirational, that are learning a discipline. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how you, maybe a few anecdotes or thoughts about like how you see struggles start to emerge with folks around these things, mental health, well-being, and some positive strategies that you've seen or that you've been able to connect young people with so that they can stay on that path with music that can be a positive.
One of the things that has happened is that over the years, I've been teaching at Cornish since 1994, so this is going to be my 25th year teaching there, is that we have seen the age of the incoming student kind of lowering down. We used to get people like in their mid-20s, so now we're getting people like 16, 17, people who are graduating out of high school earlier, and some of them super motivated, and some of them kind of like, I mean, at 17 years old, I had no idea. I really had no idea what I was like, oh, I know exactly what I want to do. I mean, I know I liked a whole bunch of things, but I could not draw a path for myself at that age. Maybe some people can, and they're very focused on that. But for me, it was just like, whoa, my body's changing. Who am I? Well, what is this thing growing on my face? You know, you kind of get puzzled by everything that happens. So we see a lot of that. We see people that are very focused, but we see people that kind of like, well, maybe I'm going to be a classical vocalist. But then you hear some gospel music. So I'm going to be a gospel vocalist. Now I'm going to be a rock pianist because, so it's okay to experiment all those things. So I believe that in music, especially so in the more recent years, the better idea is for everybody to try to become a more of a generalist rather than a specialist. Because a specialist is like, oh, I play the oboe and I only play the works of Johann Sebastian Bach from the last 10 years of his life, and and then you become like, I had a teacher that say the specialist is the guy who knows more and more about less and less until you get to the point where you know everything about nothing. That's the logical. So on the other hand, my own study biology was ecology, so it means you look at all the relationships, and I think in music is that. Theory is important. It's not fundamental. There's people who cannot read a note of music, and they play amazing music. There's people who know all the theory in the world and cannot play Happy Birthday to save their lives. So there's all these aspects. Am I saying that theory is bad? No, theory is a fantastic tool. But you have to learn, these are all different parts of a very wide landscape of music. So if music for you is all about the brain and you lose your heart, you lose your intuition, you lose the connection with that invisible part. If everything has to be explained in music, then a lot goes out that you don't access anymore. On the other hand, if you're a total intuitive musician and you show up for a gig with somebody or everybody puts music in front of you and you don't know what those little dots mean, you're also missing on a lot. So I always suggest to people that, yes, learn a little bit of everything. Some people are more brain-oriented, some people are more body-oriented, some people are more heart, emotion-oriented. We all need all three aspects. So it's hard to tell which one you lack the most, but that's what you have to work on. And eventually, hopefully, reach a state of balance with all those things and grow. So we try to tell that to the students, not to try to push them into like one, you have to do this, you know. So to try to, because many times the students we get at Cornish, when they graduate, they're not going to become professional musicians. They become better people, whatever they're going to do. So we try to help them to become citizens artists, innovators, creative people. So that I think is more important.
And I'm wondering if some of the rest of you might want to respond to some sort of positive strategies that you've seen, maybe people who were struggling, or like ways that you've seen a struggle happen with somebody in the music industry, and some positive interventions that you've seen, some success stories, and what maybe that intervention was.
I sit down with artists who are working towards being professional musicians and kind of help coach them with how to integrate the business aspect of what you have to do in order to have like a financially successful music career, because that's oftentimes like the hardest part of what an artist has to do. Like they can spend all the time and they want in the studio writing or learning to play instruments and things like that, but then they crumble when it comes to posting about their shows on social media, and doing that part of the game, or being able to ask for a certain amount of money as a guarantee when you're playing a show, things like that. So I sit down with a lot of people and kind of help them overcome that, because there is, depending on what their personal and professional goals are, there are certain avenues that you want to look into, and just finding that little bit of support and sitting down with people often really helps, just because they know that they're not alone, and they know that what they're struggling with is not just what they are failing at, because that's a scary thing for people to believe. And so just talking a little bit, like I do a lot of social media, so I coach a lot of people with that, and just to be authentic with themselves and have fun with it, and put that kind of creative energy that they put into their music into all aspects of what they do with their career. And I think that's one thing that I've seen a lot of people, after they kind of just get that kind of basic information, kind of flourish.
In engagement that you've done with like support organizations or service organizations, and ways that you've seen maybe that they come up short when it comes to engaging folks with like this creative capacity, maybe artists and musicians, like the ways that that's not a good fit sometimes with how support services do what they do, and also positive experiences that you've had maybe with Path with Art, like ways when you can see that flourish, when those support organizations look at the whole person as an artist. Any sort of pluses or minuses that you've noticed in engaging with organizations that support folks that are going through a hard time?
I think the very nature of what addiction is really misunderstood by, or poorly understood by most folks, and so just with that in mind, it's often difficult for service providers or the folks that work for the service providers to really kind of have a grounding for a good connection with the person that they're trying to give aid to. And that is really critical, that there is that connection in my experience. And I would go so far as to just also offer that, I mean, there's so many facets to what addiction really is. I mean, when you think about, like, I'll use me, but when I remember when I was growing up and I would see people on the street, and my folks would point out, that guy's an alcoholic, and it's like, okay, so that was my association with what alcoholism is. It's like you're out on the street, you're stumbling around, and whatever, you have no place to live. So that was such a misconception in my own mind of what addiction is. And I carried that with me for my life. And how many of us enjoy a cup of coffee every day? I know I do. I still do. And how many of us enjoy maybe 2 cups every day? I do, again. And if I don't get that cup of coffee in the morning, later in the day I'll have a headache. Well, that right there, that's caffeine withdrawal. And I don't know if anybody else has ever experienced that, but there's the physical addiction right there. But then there's the other part where there's the mental obsession that came with my alcoholism, where even if I went through that with those withdrawal symptoms of not drinking for whatever, a week or a month or even a few months at a time, so I got over those physical, that physical addiction, there was still this mental part. There was this mental obsession. There was this connection that had been laid down in my head that when I am feeling uptight, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling overwhelmed, whatever it is that I'm feeling, that will fix it. That alcohol or whatever, that marijuana, whatever it is, will fix that feeling. And so there's addiction is not just a real cut and dry, simple to understand piece. That's just two facets of it right there that I've laid out for you. And there's many more. And so that has been one of the biggest things that I find lacking in the services that I've tried to make use of in finding my path out of my addiction. That said, there have been a lot of personalities on this path as well that have offered love and acceptance, and that is really has been a required ingredient for my way out. And so I don't know if I can say too much more about that at this moment, but I would throw that out there for you.
I would mention just one word too, which is very important. You can always go on a public computer here and type that. It's called Music Cares. So if you are a musician, Music Cares will ask no questions and will help you out. And it's amazing, but they have a lot of resources that go unused because people are afraid to ask. And it's specifically geared for musicians. So it's an organization, because people think about the Grammys, the whole schmaltzy, flashy thing of the Grammys. That's not that. Music Cares is something that happens 365 days of the year. And it's really, people who know you're not in there because you've probably seen, they organize safe rooms in places like Bumbershoot and festivals. They reach out for musicians that had all kinds of problems, got their gear stolen, or hurricane, floods, fire, all these things that happen. Music Cares are often there before any government agencies are, to help musicians, to help them recover lost gear, to help them recover their own integrity and health, but for many reasons, financial, substance abuse, alcohol, homelessness, and it's amazing how I'm very happy to be associated with that, and we always donate stuff. Musicians donate, it goes into auctions, that money goes exclusively for that. So Music Cares is a really good word to keep in mind.
My experience with addiction was basically around food with eating disorders, which was compulsive eating, binging, and as a diabetic, that's deadly. And so my experience was I had to go out of state to get treatment because there wasn't anything that I could go to that worked the way that I needed to help, because prior to going out of state, I wasn't dealing with the mental health. So I have what is known in the field as co-occurring with the eating disorder, which is now in remission for me, thank God. But in terms of the artistic element, I would say that the agencies that I've attended, it wasn't until the most recent agency that I'm in, we had poetry classes, and that's where I made my deepest connections was with poetry. It's only recently that I've come into path with art. But so within the behavioral health agencies, I'd been to several, and there was nothing offered except for at this one where I finally landed where I had nowhere else to go because I really hit bottom in psychosis and bipolar and PTSD. So, at the agency there, they provided poetry. We recently started a music class there. But I really, and I had been doing a lot of music healing work on my own. There used to be an organization in '95 here on Bainbridge Island that was about music therapy, but I'm sorry, I don't recall the name of it. So in terms of my own recovery, I did a lot of alternative work. So I was always using my music, and I was always using my writing skills to find healing. I was graced in that matter, and that's the thing that carried me the most, but it's also the thing that was the most damaging because I wasn't with people. I mean, it's only recently that I've come to realize in my own mental health recovery with my co-occurring disorders that music really doesn't happen unless I'm with you. I don't need to put up an invisible wall. I need to be with you. And so my recovery brought that. And so I had experiences at various behavioral agencies, but I got most of it on my own. And then when it came into more Western medicine in the agencies that I was at. And I would have to say that the most positive thing was that the poetry class that was offered, they're going through a movement now that has been happening called peer support in behavioral health agencies across the United States, but a lot here. They're having people with lived experience like myself who are acting as associate counselors or assistants to people who are trying to come through recovery. And I feel that whether you have the certification or not, I have it. But what I experienced with Path with Art was just an amazing, amazing experience, just mind-blowing. Because I'm finally in a place where my music isn't isolative, and I got to be in classes where I could give. And it wasn't about me, it was about we. So, you know, I'm very indebted to Path with Art. I'm very indebted to being able to speak today, and I think I've said too much. Okay.
Please grapple with and attempt a response to what's at stake, or what do we lose when a lifelong sort of positive or career in music is a treacherous path? What do we lose when a lot of folks fall by the wayside trying to make this career work for them? Like, what's that costing us, that this is such a challenging path for folks? Another way to think about it, just to complicate things a little bit, is what makes music an essential thing that we need in our world right now today? And I know we've always needed music, and music's an important part about being a human, but I'm thinking of like May 12th, 2019. Those two things put together, do your best.
It's a big question to be thinking about. I think with a lot of the stuff that's come up recently with like Me Too, that movement, and finding out that there's been a lot of people who have been suppressed and dissuaded from the path that they really wanted to do because of folks in power abusing that power. I think that we've missed the opportunity to hear a lot of voices that we could have become our favorite records or songs that have gotten us through some really difficult times. And I think that that's one thing, but that's, that this is a recent thing that's being talked about, but that has always been a part of, any artistic industry where there's gatekeepers. Right now we're in a good mix of having a little bit of the gatekeepers, but we also have the ability to make music, create art in our own homes. We have the tools, we have the technology, we have all of that we have at our fingertips that we can do to share our own personal experience with the world. And so I feel like it can be daunting when you think about how many steps it takes to get to be Beyonce. But if you don't try, that's a missed opportunity for the rest of us to not get to experience what you have to share.
Yeah, I agree with that. She said the word gatekeepers, and it's important because somehow we feel that there's this, it's like trying to get into a nightclub and there's a big bouncer there that doesn't allow you to go in unless you are wearing something or unless you show that you make more money. So there's a lot of the external appearances that I've heard from good friends of mine, musicians in Los Angeles, that they had to buy cars that they could not afford so they could park the car in the parking lot and get called for gigs. Because say, wow, you're driving that car, so I'm going to hire you instead. And just like, I had no money. I had to buy the car on credit. So this whole idea of the external aspect of it, it's also another proof of the power of music, because everybody who's like a control freak wants to go into music. Everybody who wants to assert their ego or their power over people, they're sort of like their, what do you call, the worst really desires, what you really want is to control a lot of people. These people usually find one of the two jobs. They board their agents or they're in the music business in very high positions of power. And then that's when, as you said, the Me Too movement and how people, when that starts to come out, because it was a whole thing about not telling what goes on. It's a no man's or no woman's land. You know, the borders like that. When you are at the border with any border, I'm not talking about this country, I'm talking any border in the world, that's a no man's, right that edge there of the line. Anything could happen there, and you have no voice, you have no rights, you're absolutely, in the music world, there's that too. People say, well, if you want that, then you have to do this. And all these conditions, which music doesn't give, music never asks for conditions. If you want to play the violin, you've got to practice 200 years. No, you can play the violin. It's not going to be very good to start with. But the whole path of music has to be seen as, I always try to compare it to like, you want to, a farmer, you're going to plant an orchard. Okay, you're going to start an orchard. You're not going to get your apples or your grapes or whatever it is that you're going to get on the first year. It takes a while for that to mature, and you have to take care of it for a long time. And once it starts to produce and you start to harvest, you cannot just sit back and just harvest. You still have to continue the maintenance of that. So it's a lifelong, and you never stop as a musician. There's never going to be a place where you can say, well, now I don't have to practice anymore. I don't have to reach out to let people know about my record or the social media and to be able to publicize. The good news is that before, the gatekeepers, for you to make a record, you had to be one of the very few people chosen by a record label that had the millions of dollars necessary to put a recording studio together. Now, your bedroom can be a recording studio, and your billboard is going to be the size of the screen that's going to be people looking at your thing online, whether it's Bandcamp or Google or Facebook or any of the other social platforms. But it's important that you need to know that you need to let people know what you're doing. I think it's important. And not everybody's good at that. A lot of people are introverts. So and other people are extroverts. But the important thing is that if you are an introvert, naturally shy. I have students like that. I have students who let their hair on their face because they don't want to show their face. They're so shy. But still said, you need to find somebody who will be responsible for that. A friend, a family, a spouse, a partner, somebody that can help you be that public face. Because we are, in a way, we are in the marketplace. Sometimes we feel embarrassed about because you put so much of your life into the music, and you put the lyrics or the words mean so much to you of what you've gone through as your experience. And it's almost like you naked, vulnerable by putting it out there. Hey, you want to buy my record? I talk about my horrible life. It feels kind of like defeating, but it's a work of art. And work of arts need to be seen and heard, shared. So there's the communicational aspect of music is very important. Sometimes you need help for that, and help is good.
The idea that what do we lose along the way when we cull out people who like just couldn't make it, or the gatekeepers keep them out of the club, so to speak, to follow that analogy. And I think one thing that's like interesting to think about, I don't know if this is useful or not, but maybe it is that like the way I see people who are making, and this is universal for all art making, it's not just music, but the people who are making the most compelling and interesting work at any given time are the people who have truly honed their own individual voice. They're not regurgitating things other people have done. They may have influences, and we're all influenced by our world in ways we can't even fathom. So nobody comes out of nowhere, but the people who are the most successful artists are the people who have honed their personal voice and their personal vision for their work. And when we call those people out in this industrial process of producing commodities and the way the music industry works or doesn't work, we lose a lot of that. We lose most of that. It's chaff. I think that's really sad. I don't know if there's got to be some type of system in place to where people, I don't know. I don't know what that means, but I think that it's an important thing to just point out. And it's great. It's really great for me, at least. I get really excited when I see somebody who's really successful and doing a really good job, and like it's clear that they're the only person that can make that work. That's the most successful form of making art, I think, and making music, is to see somebody who's totally unique in their vision and pursuing it really effectively, and is also successful. It's rare. It's really rare, but it exists. There's plenty of examples. I'm sure we can all think of plenty off the top of our heads. But how many more of those potentials are out there that have become chaff, you know, that are just culled out of the system and rejected, I guess, or maybe, you know, maybe they gave up too early, you know, maybe they didn't have the stick-to-itness, but also like maybe it shouldn't be so freaking hard for them, you know. Again, I don't know if that's helpful, but it's a thought, something to think about.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to kind of piggyback on what Paurl said, and I mean, what's at stake and what do we lose? We don't know. Possibility and potential is what we lose. What my mind went to was an artist that I just absolutely loved. He's a guitarist named Danny Gatton, and if you've never heard of Danny Gatton or heard his music, go look him up because he is just amazing. He played rock and jazz and rockabilly, and he just had such a unique, incredible sound. And by being rejected over and over, Danny's mind basically, he imploded on himself and he took his own life. And so what did we lose? I mean, we lost not only the person, but all of that work that he still had in front of him to do. And so what's at stake and what do we lose? We can't know. Possibility and potential.
There's something about the stages that you go as a musician, because your own path is your path, whatever that is, whatever twists and turns that will take you. And many times we feel jealous because we could open the newspaper, turn on the radio and hear somebody that says, I'm better than that person. How come they're gigging in that place where I wanted to gig? How come they're doing this tour? And I know I'm a better musician than that. And at times it's very easy to feel frustrated, jealous, feel neglected. Remember, it's kind of a joke, but it's not really about the stages of being a musician. And I'll use my own name for that. You can say, like, who is Jovino Santos Neto? I've heard of Jovino Santos Neto. Oh, I'd like to hear Jovino Santos Neto. Get me Jovino Santos Neto. And get me another cheaper Jovino Santos Neto. And it goes down to into like, who is Jovino Santos Neto? So it's like it's a wave, but that is just a wave of public awareness of your work. That doesn't mean that your work is not going in a different direction than this wave. So sometimes it's very disheartening. You feel all those human feelings of jealousy, of, I wish I'd be there. But at the same time, you understand that there's not just like we're not climbing a mountain where there's like a top and there's only room for one person at the top. It's just like it's a series of steps. It's like looking at this auditorium here, and everybody's sitting on different levels of the auditorium. But there's one rule, the only rule I believe with music is that you will not move to the next stage until you help somebody who is in a lower stage than you to come to the stage where you are. So instead of competition, that band versus that band and that person, it's because sometimes you're not moving forward because you're actually neglecting to bring somebody up to the level where you are. And if you can do that sincerely, you will find out that most success stories they seem completely haphazard. I bumped into this person in the bus and turns out that person rescued my career, or things like this that we say, how come? The synchronicity of it, the serendipity of it is amazing, and how that builds up. So I believe in those things. I think that some of the most amazing things that happened in my life, they were never planned. Maybe I was ready for that moment, right? But maybe the other person was ready for that moment too. So life is made of these encounters, and you have to be open to that. Maybe when everything looks the bleakest is where something's going to happen. So I tend to see the glass half full in that sense. And that sometimes when I don't have a gig, it's a message that I need to practice more. That's what I think.
Again, I'm not in the music industry, but my heart is in my music, and I think it's critically important to never lose the heart and to always let your specific individual light, as you express your music, shine with everyone else, because that is what's so critical to me. And what you were saying about reaching out and helping another, that's what it's really about. Because the divaness is destructive. I mean, divaness is going to take you to the road to hell. Because you're not going to have the light of other people shining with you. It's the me business. If music becomes the me business, then it's a living hell.
Yeah, you can't do it alone, I think. At least that's how I interpret what you're saying, is like it's, and like what you're saying, Jovino, pulling people up with you and helping out other people. I think that's something that we've really we've lost or we're losing in a lot of our music culture, and I mean, I think it stems from a lack of resources, and so there's like a larger, there's a higher level of competition for what limited resources we do have, because we're always underfunded, we're always under a deadline, there's never enough to go around, we don't support the arts like we should, and that's a whole nother panel discussion for another day, but like a lot of it stems from that, I think, and like I guess just to reinforce what you guys are saying, like it's just, if we are going to make the situation better for everybody, we're going to have to start thinking more as a community and being more supportive of each other and each other's work, and less sort of myopically dedicated to our own work and promoting ourselves. And that, like, if you pull people up with you, you rise together. That idea, I think, really applies in the music world, how it exists currently.
Thank you. I have one last question that I'm going to ask, and I'm going to ask you all to try and keep it brief, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. But I do want to ask this question, which is somewhat based on this conversation today, but also obviously everybody who's here brings a wealth of life experience. So if it didn't come up today, but you're like, no, but I really think this, please share. But based on the conversation today, what is an action or recommendation that you would make to one of the following? A music artist, an industry gatekeeper, a support professional, so somebody who's like working in services, and or a music consumer. And you can be like, this one thing for all of them, or I would really, based on today's conversation, I want to share this thing with an industry gatekeeper. Clear? Okay, go have at it.
For me, it's one word: listen.
For me, if you're dealing in the services of mental health and social services, you've got to bring in the creative light of the person and make it part of their therapy. You cannot separate it, because that's where the real healing begins, is internally with your own internal music.
I would say take a chance, and that applies to a lot of the different groups that you mentioned there. For the artists, take more chances. For the gatekeepers, take more chances. For the listeners, take more chances. All of this will get better if we take more chances in everything that we're doing, the industry people as well, instead of like just going for the sure thing, that commodity that, the reason popular country music on the radio right now is so awful. Take more chances. That's my recommendation.
I think just for music consumers and listeners and art consumers, be more intentional about your relationship to the arts. Engage with it more. Think about it actively. Make it a part of your life. Your life will get better, I promise. It'll be more interesting, it'll be more enriched. We have a tendency to be very casual about how we approach music, and it's a commodity, it's a throwaway product, and in a way, I think it's kind of what you guys are already saying. Listen, but like really listen. Take more chances, but like actually take a chance. Like I don't really like rap music. Okay, well listen to some rap. Force yourself to do it. Even if you don't like it, you'll be better off for the experience. And then for the people in the industry, for musicians working, again, I think it's just about supporting each other and supporting the community and trying to do things that promote all of us and all the work we're doing. You know, pick somebody who you're in a position to maybe help out. You might have some privilege and some advantage in your current situation, and use that capital to promote somebody who is unknown or an emerging artist, as Jovino said. You know, and put your belief in them. And that, a little bit of that goes a really long way for a lot of people. People have done that for me in my process of trying to build a career in music, and it's the most helpful and beneficial gift I've ever been given. And we can't make it alone. We can't do anything alone. Really, you just can't.
Ray, do you want to add anything, or are you good? It's up to you.
Oh, I am good, but I'll add a little bit. I like what everybody added at for this last part, and I'm not sure that I totally understand the question, but I would say, put forth to everybody that's involved in music. It's like remain humble, stay connected, and give back. One of my favorite things that my band does, and we're almost all here today to support this, is, I mean, we do so much pro bono work. It's like we did a show a few weeks ago, several weeks ago at a camp down in South Seattle, and just that giving back to the community to help build community is so, not only is it good for me to like give, but it's like for the folks that we gave to, it's like they were so gracious and thankful, and it was such an amazing experience. So stay connected.
Awesome. Thank you all for your wisdom. I hope you stick around for maybe just a couple more minutes. If anybody out there has a question that you're like, oh, this is such a cool group of folks and I have this burning question. It's okay if you don't, but if anybody does.
I think what's really key important is I myself have discovered that even in myself, wanting to overachieve, compensate for my mental health, compensate for my co-occurring disorders. And I really think it's key that more is done when you are silent than when you are active, because that's when you really hear the music, is in the silence. And I'm speaking to you whether you're musically inclined or not. I come from a rich background of different cultures and understandings and the soundless sound. And I think there is a way to combat that competition, is that it's become the best you can be, but look inside, don't look outside. Because there's so much out there that's beckoning you that you can't hear what's inside in your silence. Your heart will tell you. Whether you're a musician or not, some of us, our hearts speak through music, poetry, writing, engineering, chemistry. Listen to your heart, and don't listen to the static of the white noise or the whatever noise that's out there. Give up the idea that everyone else out there has it together. It's not okay to crash. Trust me.
I agree with that. One of those things that's a lesson I had to learn, it all catches up with you. Every last minute that you put off taking care of yourself, it will hit you in a real sideways way that you're not expecting at the worst possible moment. So I know that drive and ambition, and you want to be seen as doing the best that you can be doing, and so you play that game for a really long time, but it all will catch up with you. So, like she said, just focus on listening to what your body needs, what your soul needs, what your heart needs. and not what anybody else is thinking, saying, or doing, because they're also struggling with these same things as well, and they will crash as well. And so the more care that you can give to yourself and trust your own judgment and trust your own strengths and talents and abilities, the more that you do that, you will ultimately be more successful in the long run.
And I'll just add to that, I agree with what they both have said here, but remember that music is an art in time. And as a college teacher, and I see a lot of students dealing with exactly the situation that you have described, and in the end, it comes down to how you manage time. Because people say, oh, I wish I had time, I don't have time, don't have time for this, there's no, I mean, time is the only thing that everybody on the planet has the same amount. We might have different ages, different money, different food, different sizes, different colors, different shapes. But time is what we all have the same. So when people say they don't have time, it's like nobody has time. Time is not something that we have. But it's something that if you don't manage the flow of it, I mean, for everybody, that's a generic sort of like, yes, that's a platitude. It's a duh. But at the same time, because our area of work is the work of music, which flows in time, it should be something that if you learn how to play music, you also learn how to manage time. Is your song going to be 5 minutes or 50 minutes? That is a big question. Are you going to take 200 choruses of improvisation or 2? So these are important questions that have to do with the time of music, which is very different than the time of clocks and watches and days and weeks and years. It's the dynamic time. So that's, in other words, to see time as being that, I think you put yourself in the creative, the same way you're creative about the time decisions you make about your music, you apply that to your life. The dynamic time of your life is what was going to tell you, not yet. It's the time when you see the window passing and you say, do I jump now or do I wait until the next window, which might never come? So that we cannot make that decision for the others, but your intuition might guide you with that.
All right, so I'm going to have us wrap there because I just looked at the schedule and I was like, oh, we're past that a little bit. So I want to say thank you to all of you for being on this panel. I know we've got a small but rowdy group. Could give them a round of applause, perhaps. Yes?